So hello everybody and welcome to my review of Baruuk. Now Baruuk is an interesting Warframe because when you look at the stats he looks pretty squishy, yet he is one of the most survivable frames in the entire game, and if you build him right and you use his abilities correctly, he is a very tanky boy. Now Baruuk uses two different types of resources. He uses the standard energy for his first, second and third ability, but his fourth ability uses Restraint, which is indicated by a little doohickey at the bottom right corner of the screen. This Restraint gauge works in reverse. So when you start out it's full, and as you do stuff it will slowly drain, and as it does drain you get additional damage reduction that goes up to 50% when it's fully depleted. And that's actually Baruuk's passive. The less restraint he has, the more damage reduction he gets. The way you drain your restraint so that you can activate your fourth ability is either via evading damage with his first ability, affecting enemies and putting them to sleep with his second ability, or disarming enemies with his third ability. Once you drain at least a little bit of restraint, you'll be able to activate Baruuk's fourth ability, his Exalted Fists, and go absolutely ham, which will restore restraint over time. But the cool thing here is that even when you have the Exalted Fists active and you're restoring your restraint, you can still drain it with his other ability. So if you build Baruuk right and you use the abilities correctly, you can use the Exalted Fist for very long periods of time. So Baruuk's first ability is called Elude, where he enters a stance and becomes elusive, allowing enemy attacks and bullets to pass straight through him. This does have some restrictions though. It only works in front of Baruuk in a 180-degree cone. So as you can see, this heavy gunner is behind me and the bullets are hitting me in the back, but once she gets in front of me and into that 180-degree cone, her bullets will pass straight through me. This is based on where Baruuk is facing, so even if your camera is looking at the enemy, you might still get shot because your frame is turned the other way. And the second thing is it only works when you're not attacking, so when you're standing still or running around or jumping about. Once you start attacking, whether it be shooting or swinging your melee weapon, you cannot elude projectiles anymore. Now, every time you elude a projectile, it will drain 1.2% of your restraint, and it's actually the best way of draining your restraint against enemies that have high rate of fire, so enemies like heavy gunners. The ability is fairly expensive though, especially for a first ability, draining 25 energy to be activated, which can be lowered with power efficiency, and then further 2.5 energy every second while it's active, which can be affected by power efficiency and power duration. You can also increase the angle in which you will dodge projectiles by adding more power range. Baruuk's second ability is called Lull, where he will emit a calming wave that will cover an area of 25 meters around Baruuk for 5 seconds, and enemies in this area will slowly fall asleep for 20 seconds. And I do mean slowly, it is not instant, it takes them a few seconds to actually fall asleep. Now, few things here. Number one, every enemy hit with this calming aura will drain 0.8% of your restraint, so it's a pretty good way of draining restraint against large groups of enemies. Number 2, sleeping enemies are open to finishers, so you can run up to them and do a melee finisher. And number 3, these enemies are asleep, not stunned, so if you damage them in any way, shape or form, they will wake up. Luckily, you can recast Lull as soon as the calming aura goes away, so you don't have to wait for the enemies to wake up. Now, you can increase the range of the calming wave that you emit by adding power range, and power duration doesn't just affect the amount of time the enemies will be asleep, it also affects the duration of the calming wave. So adding a ton of power duration is not necessarily the best idea, because while it will put the enemies to sleep for a longer period of time, it will also increase the duration of the wave, so you're gonna have to wait longer before you can recast the ability. Adding power duration here is basically a question of how long do I want to wait before I can recast the ability again, and how long do I want to crowd control the enemies for. And finally, you can of course reduce the cost of the ability, which by default is 50, by adding power efficiency. Now, there's also an augment for Lull called Endless Lullaby, and what this does is it makes it so that whenever you do a finisher on an enemy that's been put to sleep by Lull, it will trigger another instance of Lull with 100% of the remaining duration. Plus, it is a nice little bonus because it gives you plus 50% bonus Lull duration as a passive. This is a really cool augment that changes your playstyle a little bit. It allows you to go in a little bit more sneakily, though granted, it was a little bit better back when COVID lethality on daggers ensured a one-shot on a finisher. Now, mods like this usually have an internal cooldown, but this one doesn't, so you can just trigger it over and over and over again, spreading Lull all over the place and putting basically everything to sleep. Baruuk's third ability is called Desolate Hands, where he summons 8 daggers to begin with that will orbit around him, and each dagger will provide him with 10% damage reduction. Now, these daggers will seek out enemies that are within 6 meters of Baruuk, and if they find one, they will shoot off into them, doing 250 blast damage to all enemies within 3 meters and disarm them. Each enemy can only be hit once, and when the dagger shoots off, you lose it. And with it, you lose its damage reduction. However, you can increase the amount of daggers as well as the damage the daggers do by adding power strength, so you can easily push your damage reduction up to 90%, which is the cap. And you can affect the range in which these daggers will seek out enemies by manipulating your power range. And while the ability is fairly expensive, it costs 75 energy at base, you can lower the cost by adding power efficiency, and you can also recast it at any time, resetting you to full daggers. But that's not all, because these daggers will also seek out allies and allied structures, so things like defense cryopods or even the Kuva dispensers in Kuva Survival. And if they find one, they will shoot off as well, though this time around you don't actually lose the daggers, unlike when it shoots off into an enemy. Now, when this happens, the ally will get 50% of your modded daggers. So if your number of daggers after mods is 16, the ally will get 8. Providing them in that case with 80% damage reduction, unless they are a cryopod or something like that, because on defense objectives the damage reduction is capped to 50 even though they can carry more than 5 daggers. This ability is also pretty good for sort of passively draining Restraint, because every time one of your daggers shoots off and hits an enemy, it will drain 1.6% of your Restraint. And it also synergizes a little bit with Baruuk's other ability, so Elude, which is Baruuk's first ability, will double the seeking range of your daggers while it's active, and if you put enemies to sleep by Lull and they get hit by a dagger, they will not wake up. And Baruuk's fourth and final ability is called Serene Storm, where he's finally had enough, his restraint has been drained, and he is ready to go ham. This unleashes a pair of exalted fist weapons called the Desert Wind, and these do a ton of damage. Now, these attacks will do 250 impact damage, and it is pure impact, but it comes with 50% base crit, a standard crit multi, and a 15% status chance as well. Now, this ability is free energy-wise, but when you first activate it, it will recover 4% of your restraint and then additional 0.8% of your restraint for every second that it's active. However, as mentioned earlier, you can still drain your restraint with Baruuk's other abilities, allowing you to stay in this basically forever if you have the right build. This ability is absolutely ridiculous, and not just because every attack will also release a wave that will travel for 20 meters doing the same damage as the melee attack and also return projectiles back to the attacker, but also because it has its own stance with its own combos that have a ton of multi-hits though they don't have any damage multiplication on them, and most importantly because of the way its damage is multiplied. So you can increase the damage by putting power strength on Baruuk. Then you can build up your combo counter, which will increase the damage as well. And then, since it's an exalted ability, it has its own mod section in the arsenal where you can really juice it up with melee mods. Plus, it also has an augment called Reactive Storm, and this one is really good as well. What it does is, first of all, gives you 250% bonus status chance, which on its own is amazing. But it will also change the damage of Serene Storm on the fly, matching the element the enemy you are currently hitting is most weak to. So if you're hitting an enemy that's weak to viral, it will do viral. If you're hitting an enemy that's weak to corrosive, it will do corrosive. This, combined with a crazy amount of base crit you have on the ability, with the high status you get from the mod and the various ways in which you can multiply the damage, means that this will do a disgusting amount of damage against everything. Oh yeah, and I also forgot to mention that while you're in Serene Storm, you have 25% damage reduction, which can be pumped all the way up to 40% with power strength. This is why, or rather one of the reasons why Baruuk, despite not having the tankiest stats, is a very tanky lad. Baruuk is one of those frames that I feel like everyone should have to at least give him a try, because he's absolutely fantastic. You can run him as a gun frame and just use daggers to get some additional damage reduction, or you can utilize his full kit and absolutely demolish the game while having a ton of fun. So if you don't have Baruuk yet, go and get him. He is one of my favorite frames in the game and he is just fantastic. And that is pretty much it for the video, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I would like to extend a special thank you to all the channel members. Thank you very much guys, and I will see you some other time. Bye bye.